by looking at those middle chapters further, we're going to go from chapter 14 to chapter 20. If you have a Bible, you can get out and follow along, though we won't be reading from the Bible directly this morning. We're going to do something different, not the normal format. We're going to do one of those first-person narrative sermons where I take on the persona of a character from the biblical narrative and tell the story from that person's perspective. So we take the biblical narrative, we add in hopefully a little spirit-inspired imagination, and hopefully you can all use your spirit-inspired imagination to follow along with the story of this biblical character.
Check your mic here.
And the mic is looking much greener now. Huh. Funny that. So, welcome to you just joining us on your devices this morning. Now you have audio to go with the video. We're going to do a first-person narrative sermon, so I'll just step off stage. When I come back on, I'll be in character, same clothing, but in character as one of those people in the biblical narrative. So, here we go. Shalom. My name is Jonathon. You may not be aware of who I am, but I'm sure most of you have heard of my father. My father is Saul, king of Israel, the first king ever appointed or anointed or crowned to be leader of the people of Israel. My father was a valiant warrior. He was a brave man. The Spirit of the Lord came on him when Samuel anointed him to be king and empowered him to lead our people in many great battles and victories against the Philistines, who were continuously attacking us, taking over our territories and towns, and we had to fight to push them back. But my father never wanted to be king. In fact, when it came time to crown him as the king and leader of our people, my father, he hid among the luggage, and they had to search to find him, to bring him out and present him to the people as their king and leader. Samuel, the last judge of the people of Israel, who was leader also of the people, is the one who crowned my father as king. But during the period of judges, they each lived in their own towns and in their own villages. So though I am Prince Jonathon, and my father was King Saul, we didn't grow up like royal families that you may think of, with palaces and all kinds of ornate things within those palaces. We grew up in more humble surroundings near Gibeah of Saul, as it came to be known. And I had a more normal lifestyle growing up, even though I was part of a royal family. I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and we followed our dad around. We were so constantly as a people at war that whenever my father would find a man who was strong or brave or valiant, he would conscript him into the army. And that man would come and stay with us or in the vicinity around Gibeah with encampments outside the village. And whenever the Philistines would come, it would be quicker then to muster a force and go out to meet them. Personally, myself and my brothers, we learned to do battle when we were young. We would constantly be sword fighting and fighting with spears, and not to harm one another, though occasionally one of us did receive a bruise or 2. Did you ever have siblings? Did you ever fight beyond the point of friendliness? Anyway, my brothers and I all learned how to wield a sword and how to fight with a spear and how to shoot with a bow and defend ourselves with a shield. And as we grew up, we got to the point where we were also conscripted into the army and would follow our father into battle. It was continuous, these Philistines and their raiding parties and their army coming in and setting up outposts in our territory, land that God our Father had given to our people. And it seemed like we were always at war. Well, I remember one time in particular when the Philistines had come and taken over some towns and territories and set up outposts among us. And there was about 600 of the army left with my father at Gibeah. Others had slunk away and hidden in caves and crevices and cracks in the rock. And then still others had left us to join with the Philistines and were helping them in their fight against us. It was a terrible time for we as God's people and for the Israelite army in particular. And as we sat around the campfires and talked around the camp, one day the Lord put it in my mind to leave on my own with my armor bearer, my very young armor bearer, and we went out to meet up with the Philistines all on our own. I said nothing to my father that I was leaving and that we were going to try to instigate something with the enemy, but I really felt the Spirit of the Lord compelling me to do something. So I talked to my armor bearer and I told him what I planned to do. I said, it seems like God might want us to take on the enemy, to start something with the Philistines. And if you're willing, come with me and we're going to go up to the Philistine outpost and we're going to see what God will do. Perhaps the Lord will turn over these uncircumcised fellows and hand them over to us and give us a victory on this day. My armor bearer said, that sounds good to me. Let's do that. Whatever you have in your heart and in your mind, I am with you with all my soul. I'll follow you into battle this day, even if it's only the two of us going to fight these Philistines at this outpost. I said to my armor bearer, there's nothing that can hinder the Lord. The Lord can rescue, the Lord can save, whether by many or by few. I wonder those of you who are listening today, if you believe that there's nothing that can hinder the Lord, absolutely nothing that can stand in the way of what he wants to do, whether there be many who are on his side or even only one or two, like there was that day for us. Whatever it is that God wants to do, he can do it no matter how many align themselves with him. So my armor bearer and I that day, we decided to go up and to fight the Philistines. Now there was a cliff on both sides, one to the north and one to the south, and a ravine in between. And when we came to the end of the ravine, the Philistines had their outpost at the top of that ravine. And it was rather steep, the incline to reach the outpost that the Philistines had set up. And one couldn't walk up like you would walk down a road, even a steep road. Indeed, you had to climb from rock to rock using hands and feet. You couldn't go up there with a sword or a spear in your hand ready to fight. I said to my armor bearer, listen, here's what we'll do. When we get there, we'll show ourselves to the Philistines. We'll let them see us. Even though we know they have bow and arrow, we'll show ourselves. And if they say, stay there and we'll come down to you and teach you a lesson, then we'll just stay where we are and wait till they come. But if they say, come up here to us, that'll be the sign. We'll know that the Lord has given them over into our hands and will give us the victory over these Philistines this day. So we did that. We went through the ravine, and came to the pass, and we came out from behind the rocks and stood there in plain sight. And the Philistines, they looked down and they said, look, the Israelites are crawling out of the holes where they've been hiding. Sadly true. So many of the men, more than half, had dispersed, had defected. Well, some had defected, others had just deserted. And they were hiding because of their fear of the Philistines. We hadn't been hiding, but to the Philistines, it's like, oh, here comes two of those guys who've been hiding in the rocks, and now they're coming out to fight against us. And so they said to us, come up here and we'll teach you a lesson. Well, I said to my armor bearer, that's the sign. That's what we were asking the Lord for. A clear sign that he would give us the victory this day. And so we climbed up, using hands and feet from one rock to the other. It was a slow climb. It was a steep climb, but we got to the top. with our swords and spears and everything still not in our hands. And as we climbed over the top, the Philistines allowed us to stand to our feet. They were so proud and pompous and overconfident. There was over 20 of them and just 2 of us. Well, that was their first mistake, letting us stand to our feet. For then I was able to pull my sword and my armor bearer as well. And they rushed us. I was able to knock one down and wound another. And then the battle was on. And my armor bearer, who was swift with a sword, slayed the one who was on the ground and then the one who was wounded. And as I was wounding and knocking down and killing a few, he came behind me and killed the others. And within the space of half an acre, we had killed 20 Philistines. And the others turned tail and ran. And the Lord set a panic among the Philistine army that day. As they saw and heard what was happening, as others ran away, a panic descended on the Philistine army from the Lord. And those in the field, and those in their camps, and those in the outposts, and others in raiding parties, they all went into a panic. In fact, it was so bad, the panic that the Lord sent, he even shook the ground beneath our feet. The earth quaked beneath us. And the panic rose to a fever pitch. The Philistines began fighting against each other. Can you imagine? They lost all control. And the Lord brought reinforcements from the most improbable places. The Israelites who had gone over to the Philistines and were helping them, they rejoined our ranks and they fought against the Philistines. And all the men who'd been hiding in rocks and crevices and caves came out and joined us as well. And we were able to rout the Philistines that day and destroy many of our enemies and get a great victory. God is able to do amazing things beyond anything you can ask or imagine. He can save with many. He can save with few. He can set things rolling to accomplish his purposes with just 1 or 2. And that may be you. There's nothing that's impossible with our God. What a great victory was won that day. Because the Lord put it in my heart to do something unimaginable, which I on my own would never have thought to do or struck out to accomplish without the Lord prompting and me pursuing. Well, it should have been a much bigger victory that day. It should have been a much greater day in the history of Israel, except for something my father did. King Saul, the leader of the nation, was not a perfect man. How many of you had parents who were perfect? My father let his personal feelings put a yoke on the entire army. He swore an oath and said, "Cursed be anyone who eats anything before evening until I have had my revenge on my enemies." So none of the people, no one in the army, none of the soldiers could take a single bite to eat to replenish their strength, to refresh their spirit, to give them energy to pursue our enemies as we were chasing them from our towns and territories. What a foolish thing. Don't let your personal feelings get in the way of what God wants to do in you or in other people. Don't project your stuff onto other people and hinder the work of God in their lives. I wasn't there when my father proclaimed this curse on anyone who would take food. So when I was walking through the forest pursuing the enemy, there was honey on the ground. A honeycomb had broken and fallen to the ground, and I dipped my staff in the honey and put it to my lips. And as I was eating this honey, I could feel my whole spirit brighten, my eyes brightened, my strength was renewed, my spirit was refreshed. I had energy to go on. I could have pursued the enemy all day and into the night. One of the soldiers who saw me do it said, "Jonathon, what have you done? Your father proclaimed a curse on anyone who would eat anything on this day before evening." I didn't know. I wasn't there. We went on pursuing the enemy, and then the men took some of the plunder after evening had arrived, and they killed it. Mind you, they were killing and eating without properly bleeding the animals, and my father said, "Stop, everybody stop this." And he set up a rock and said, "Bring the animals here and let's bleed them properly before anyone eats any meat with blood in it," which would go against what the Lord has commanded. And then Saul wanted to go, my father, and pursue the enemy through the night. Seldom do we hear of that happening in the history of Israel. But my father wanted to press the advantage because the enemy was in such a panic. They were in fear of us for a change. But Ahijah, the prophet who was with us, who had the ephod, said, "Let's inquire of the Lord first." And so they did. And the Lord didn't answer Saul. When my father asked, "Shall we pursue the Philistines?" there was no answer. So he said, "Oh, something's wrong here. Somebody must have done something they shouldn't have done." And so my father said, "Okay, let's find out whether it's me and my family or the army in general. We'll kind of try and whittle this down." And the lot fell to our family. And my father said, "Okay, well, who is it?" There was only me and my dad in the army at that point. My younger brothers weren't yet part of the army. And so they separated the two of us, and the lot fell to me. My father said, "Jonathan, what have you done?" I said, "Dad, I didn't know. Apparently you put this curse out there, and I was walking through the woods, and you know I wasn't here. I was fighting the enemy. And I took some honey, and I ate it, and I'm sorry, I didn't know." And Saul said, "You have to die." My own father said, "I have to fulfill this curse that I put on. If I don't follow through, then who am I as a leader?" And he was going to put me to death for something I didn't even know about. And all of the men stood up to the king that day and said, "Far be it from you to kill Jonathan. The Lord has brought a great victory to our people this day, and it was because of Jonathan and what he did. No, not a hair of his head will fall this day." And everyone stood against my father, the king, that day. Thank God for people who are willing to stand up, even to those in leadership, when they're about to do the wrong thing, even if it is to a king. And the Lord spared my life that day because of the faithfulness of the men who stood up to my father. Well, there's another chapter in my story that you may know quite well. The Philistines, as I mentioned, came into our territory over and over again. And on one occasion, they came and set up camp on one side of the valley, and we set up our lines on the other side. And they had brought a champion with them. You may know of the man. His name was Goliath. And he was huge, a mountain of a man. And for 40 days and nights, he would come out and he would taunt the armies of the living God. He would say, "You are dogs. None of you will fight me. Come and fight me. Send out your champion to fight me." My father, as I mentioned, had been the bravest and most valiant of all the people of Israel. And he was our champion. But my father had fallen into prideful disobedience to the Lord. And the Lord removed his spirit from my father. And when the spirit of the Lord left my father, his bravery, his valiance, his courage left him as well. So the whole time that Goliath was coming out to mock God's people, my father was hiding in his tent. Now you say, "What about you, Jonathan? God used you to bring about this great victory. Why didn't you go out and fight Goliath?" Honestly, when the first battle happened, I had a sense that God had this purpose in mind for me. And we went out and tested the waters, and God gave us the sign, and so we went up and fought those Philistines at that outpost. But there wasn't a single time of the 80 times that Goliath stood mocking God's armies that I sensed that God wanted this to be my fight, my battle. That I was the one to take on this giant on behalf of God or our people. Did I believe that God could do it? Yes, I did. But it wasn't my sense that I was the one. But you know what? There was another young man. You may know of the young man David, who did have a sense of purpose from God, that God would give this giant Philistine into his hands and give him the victory on behalf of his people. Well, my father heard that David thought such things and called him to the royal tent. And he inquired David what his thoughts were about it, and David said, God will give the victory. This Philistine, this uncircumcised fellow, he will not prevail. And all the world will know that there is a God in Israel. My father commissioned David, and he went out and he fought the giant, and he won the battle, he killed the giant, and indeed we were able to pursue the Philistines, and many of them fell that day. It was another great victory for Israel. And from that day forward, my father did not allow David to go back to Bethlehem to his family. Did not allow him to go back to his father and his brothers to tend the sheep. He said, no, you're staying with us. You're going to be part of the army from now on. And he lived with us at Gibeah. And he became like part of our own family. I mentioned I had two brothers, Ishvi and Malchishua. And I had two sisters, Merab and Michael. And I love my family, but, you know, there were limits to how much I loved my family. We didn't always get along. And sometimes we would fight and argue. But David and I, we were so close. We were like two humps on a camel. We did everything together. We went everywhere together. We were virtually inseparable. I loved him more than my family, more than my brothers. I loved him more than I loved myself. We were one in spirit. We both had this strong faith and belief in God. A belief that God could do anything and would do anything if we would follow him faithfully. And that our highest purpose in life was to follow God and to serve God and to accomplish his purposes on the earth. David and I were so close. I was a prince. I was of royal blood, and I had the best of everything. In fact, I had two of many things. And David was from more humble means and had very few things. So I gave David gifts. I gave him my royal robe, symbol of my status as the prince, the crown prince. And I gave him my sword and my belt, and I gave him my bow, and I gave him my tunic. And you know, I would give him anything. Was I concerned about him having my royal robe, which to some might indicate that he would be the next king? Not in the least. I loved David more than a brother. And I trusted David, and I believed that he had in mind the best interests of God and our people. And I had in mind the best interests for David and for God and our people. And if God chose him to be the next king, I wouldn't stand in the way. I wouldn't assert my right to be the next king. I would follow David into battle anywhere, anytime, and I would follow him as my king, if that's what God wanted. David and I loved each other like brothers. But you know, my sister loved David a little differently from what I did. Every time he walked in the room, she'd go, oh. And a couple of times she fell to the couch. Her knees got so weak. Wow. She had it bad. Now, David was a handsome lad, but she could not get over him. And indeed, my father first wanted David to marry my sister Merab, the older sister. And he encouraged him to marry her. He thought, you know, that way I can keep an eye on her. But David said, I am a humble man from humble means. Who am I to become the king's son-in-law? This is too great a thing for someone from my station or position. No, I can't become the king's son-in-law. I can't marry your daughter Merab. So when it came time for Merab to be married, she was given to another. But then my dad found out how my sister Michael felt about David. Oh, you're in love with David. Well, we'll have to see what we can arrange. And so, my father decided, being direct last time didn't work. I'll do something different this time. And so he spoke to his attendants and said, why don't you go talk to David and say, oh, the king is pleased with you, and he would love to have you to be his son-in-law. He would consider it an honor to have you join the family. And David said, oh, I am a man of humble means, and I have very little to offer. To become a son of the king, a son-in-law, would require the bride price beyond my means. There's nothing I could do. I could never accomplish that. So they went and told my dad, and he said, oh, here's an opportunity. Tell David, all I want as a bride price for my daughter is 100 Philistine foreskins. All David has to do is go out and kill 100 Philistines and cut off their foreskins and bring them back to me, and then he can marry my daughter. So the attendants went back to David. And they said, David, the king does not want gold or silver or jewels. No amount of wealth you could bring would be sufficient. Here's the thing the king would like from you. 100 Philistine foreskins. That's all the bride price that the king requires. My dad was thinking, let the Philistines kill David. Because he was getting more and more jealous all the time of the attention and the honor that David was receiving from the people. Indeed, the women, as they go down the street after a battle, would call out, Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands. Now, in our culture, that really didn't mean anything. That was just a normal way of saying they both killed thousands. But my dad, his thinking had gotten so twisted that he took that personally to mean, oh, they think more highly of David than they do of me. That wasn't at all the intent. No one else would have taken it that way unless their heart and their mind and their vision was twisted with jealousy and envy as my father's was. And the envy and the jealousy continued to grow. And so he was trying to devise ways to kill David without doing it himself. Thus, 100 Philistine foreskins. I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but David was continuing to grow in his prominence as a general, as a leader in our army. And would take out 1,000 men, and every time leaders would go out with parts of the army and fight against part of the Philistine army, David would have more success than anyone else. And when it was told him, all you need is 100 Philistine foreskins to become the king's son-in-law, he said, done! And he took 1,000 men and went out and got 200 Philistine foreskins and brought them back. And my father gave Michal, my sister, to David to be his wife. And he became son-in-law of the king and my brother-in-law. It was a great day for all of us. We were so happy, so ecstatic that this would happen. Well, not everyone, as I insinuated, loved and respected David. One day my dad said to me and to all of his attendants, I want you to kill David. When he realized that God was with David, he became more and more paranoid that David would even get the kingdom. And so he gave up trying these other plans and said it directly to us. I want you to kill David. So right away, what I did is I ran to David. And I warned him. I said, go hide yourself. Don't let any of my dad's attendants find you, for they've been instructed to kill you. And even he told me to kill you too. He said, I'll talk to my dad. I'll bring him out to the field where you're hiding, and we'll have a conversation, and you'll know what my father thinks. And so I did. I said, Dad, can we go for a walk? We need to talk away from all the guys. And we went out in the field and we're talking. And Dad, what did David ever do to you? Why do you hate him? Why do you want to kill him? Look, David was used by God to bring a great victory to our people. And you benefited greatly that day as well. Your kingdom is stronger, your power is greater because David's on your side. Why would you want to kill him? What has he ever done to deserve it? And my father relented. He said, you're absolutely right, Jonathan. What you say is very wise. Far be it from me to bring harm to David. Nothing will happen. He will not die. What a beautiful thing when parents are humble enough to listen to a good point or perspective when presented by their children. Too many parents won't ever listen to their children. They just dismiss them. But that day, my father listened to me. And the danger for David passed over. I went and told David about the conversation we had. I told him everything that we said. And I was able to bring him back to the royal dwellings, and he was with us once again, as he had been before, living among us as one of the family, with his wife Michael. They had their own portion, their own place. It wasn't long after that David approached me after having been gone for a while. And he said to me, Jonathan, what did I ever do that your father wants to kill me? What crime have I committed? Why does he want to harm me? I said, David, remember that I told you the conversation we had? He promised me. He took an oath. He said, no harm will befall David. And David said, no. You don't understand. Your father hid this from you because he knows that we're like brothers, that we love one another so deeply that you would never betray me. In fact, he probably figured out last time he said to kill me that you came and warned me. So he said, I can't tell Jonathan or he'll be grieved. And he'll go against what I want. But since that time, your father tried to pin me to a wall with a spear. And then he sent men to our house to kill me. And if your sister, my wife Michael, hadn't let me down from the window with sheets wrapped together, I would be dead. I would not be standing here with you today. As surely as we speak, there's only a step between me and death, Jonathan. Jonathan was greatly grieved to hear it, indeed. Yes. I said, David, if this is true, I will find out. And we created a plan to search my father's heart and know exactly what he was thinking. And David and I pledged our love and loyalty to one another, not only in our lifetimes, but for our descendants too. That we would honor one another, that we would safeguard one another, that we would respect one another's descendants and families, and do them no harm. Often when a new king came, he would wipe out others who might have a claim to the throne. But David promised me that when the Lord brought him to power, that he would not harm any of my family or descendants. Nor even me, should he become king while I was still alive. So David hid out in the field again. And I went home and we celebrated the New Moon Festival. And on the first night of the festival, my father noticed that David wasn't present. And he said to himself, oh, well, David must be unclean. Maybe he's touched a dead body, a dead animal, or something or other. And for some reason he's unclean, and he couldn't come to the festival. And the second day, he noticed again that David wasn't present. So he said to me, Jonathan, do you know where David is? Why isn't he here? I said, oh, Dad, David asked me if he could go home for the festival because his family was having a sacrifice and a feast in Bethlehem. And his brother ordered him and said, you haven't been home in years. It's time for you to come home and be with your family. You need to be here. And so I said, oh, listen, okay, you have my permission to spend this festival with your family back in Bethlehem. And my father was enraged. And he said, you perverse son of a perverse woman, you have sided with the son of Jesse. Your kingdom and your reign will never be established as long as he is alive on this earth. Bring him to me and I'll put him to death. Well, I was angry with my father. It was obvious that he wanted to kill him. I said, why? What has he ever done? The same thing I said to him in our last conversation. And instead of agreeing with me, he took his spear and he threw it at me and tried to kill me. So I knew he was determined to kill David. I stormed out in fierce anger. The next morning I went out to the field where David was hiding. And I took a young boy with me. And I said, okay, I'm going to shoot an arrow and you go get it. And I shot the arrow beyond him. And when he came to the arrow, I said, isn't the arrow far beyond you? go, quick, go retrieve it, quick, you must go now. And he grabbed the arrow and he brought it back to me, and I gave him my bow and the other arrows, and I said, take these back into town, and I'll be back shortly. But the boy knew nothing about the plan. And I talked to David. He came out from behind the rock, and we embraced one another, and we wept together, because we knew this was the end of our friendship, that we couldn't spend time together anymore, that David needed to flee for his life. How hard it is to lose someone who's been so close. When you're one in spirit and purpose, when you love each other more deeply than your own family, it breaks one's heart. And we wept. David wept more than I did. And we made an oath between ourselves that the Lord would watch between us, that we would treat one another's descendants with respect and dignity and safeguard one another's descendants. Then David left, and I went back into town. What about you? Do you have friends? Are you faithful to your friends? Are you loyal to your friends? What about you? Are you faithful to your God? Are you loyal to your God when He prompts or moves you? Are you willing to do whatever it is He asks, no matter how difficult it might seem? Have you shown courage lately when God's asked you to do something, or have you fainted away and hidden in the rocks and caves from what He's calling you to? May the Lord give you strength of purpose in following Him, and a heart of faithfulness towards Him and towards all who are your friends, especially those who also follow Him. May I say a prayer with you before I go? Lord, show us if there's any hint of envy or jealousy in our hearts that's twisting our perspective of the world or the people around us, or ways in which we're trying to influence people around us that are detrimental to their good and what you want to do in them or through them. Give us hearts of courage. Give us hearts to trust you. Give us hearts of boldness to follow you wherever you would lead and whatever you would call us to do. Thank you, O Lord God Almighty, maker of heaven and earth. We praise you this day. Amen. Thank you for hearing my story. May the Lord bless you. Shalom. Let's bow again. Thank you, Lord, that you never let go, that you're always with us, and that you can give the victory even when it seems impossible. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May endow you with eyes of faith this week to see what He has in store for you and to walk courageously toward it. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great week, everyone.